snare drums. So we've got drum shells and hype in the manufacturing industry. We've covered that, but snare drums comes up, and people ask, well, wait a minute, if the shell material does not make a difference, why do snare drums sound different? 8 snare drums here, and I've got a couple others I'll show you later. Let's go through this quickly, all right? Before I strike the drums, let me tell you what the drums are. They're all 13-inch. I began playing 13-inch drums in mid-90s, and I really liked them, and I've just stayed with them ever since. This is a 14, so they're all 13-inch drums, 14-inch drum. I've made them all except for these two, and I've made them from scratch except for these two, which these shells were made by somebody else, and then I put them together. Component parts, right? Okay, so here we go. 6.5 by 13 stave drum. 1-inch thick maple staves. 6.5 by 13. This is a 5.5 by 13. It was a tom. I just cut it down, turned it into a snare drum. Okay? 5.5 by 13, 8 or 10 ply shell, Keller shell. 7 by 13 poplar stave shell. 1-inch thick. These are 3/4 of an inch thick staves. This is a Ipe ironwood shell made for me by Addiction Drums. It's about somewhere between 6 1/4, 6.5 inches by 13, 1/2 inch thick shell. This is a 7 by 13 aluminum shell made for me by a friend who has since passed away. Worked at an aircraft plant in Indiana, and he made this shell for me. Prince of a guy, beautiful shell, about 3/16 of an inch thick. 7 by 13. This is a Tama, 6.5 by 13 steel. This is a DW 5.5 by 14 black nickel over brass. And this is like a partner to this one. This is also, this one is quilted maple with wood lugs. This has brass, all brass hardware. It is a tiger maple 1-inch thick staves as well, 6.5 by 13. Now they all have single ply coated heads except for this Evans head, which is like a frosted head with a kind of a tone muffler in the head and a dot underneath the head here. And this is just a single ply clear head that I was messing around with. There's very little variation in the snare side heads. Pretty much I use the same thickness, whether it's Evans or Remo. It's the Diplomat or the 300 weight. The hardware is different on all of them. As far as the strainer systems, wires, there's brass wires here. I think these have steel wires. This may have bronze. This will have steel. This one has steel, I think. This one may have brass wires as well. So there's slight variation in the wires, all right? So, based on the materials, the depths, heads are the same, largely. Even this head, even though it's got a dot on it, which is going to dry out the sound some and muffle it a little bit so it doesn't have a boing to it. These are all wide open. That's not my sound. I'll show you some things in a little bit. But I just left them wide open, no muffling at all, except for the natural muffling on this head. All right. So the heads are basically the same thickness. Even this one, even though this is coated, still 10 mil single ply head. It's just clear, no coating. So I tried to find a balance. I tried to find a balance between you being able to hear my voice and not destroying the the meters on the camera, because it just sounds like a bunch of gunshots going off in here. So this will be loud for the camera, and I wish my voice could be as loud. If I raise my voice so it's easy to hear, I will totally destroy the camera with the snare drums. All right. Now, again, you would think because there's different shell material, thicknesses are different, material is different, depths are different, I should get a lot of variation in sound here. Watch. again. I'll tell you what I hear sitting here. The two drums that are shallow, more shallow than the others, have a crisper sound and a little brighter sound coming out of the one with just a clear head, no coating. Otherwise, same relative pitch. All the heads are tensioned, snare side, batter side, to the same relative pitch, so the material has almost nothing to do with the sound. If the material is going to have something to do with the sound, why would it sound different? Because snare drums are, for the most part, more shallow than other drums. I like my shallow drums, and I explained why, so I won't go there. But snare drums, for the most part, are shallow drums. All right, 3 inches, 3.5, all the way up to 9 or 10 inches deep. I made a 10 by 13 snare drum back in the 1990s. Played it for years. I liked it. I sold it. I shouldn't have. I liked it. I like that drum. It's a pretty cool drum. But in regard to the material that's here, why do the drums basically sound the same? Because the sound of the drum is the heads, and all the heads are basically the same, and they are tensioned to the same relative pitch, both sides. So the drums basically give off the same pitch. Does the shell color the sound? How much variation should there be between metal drums and wood drums? There's no great brightness distinction between this wood drum and this metal drum. If you tighten heads, all right, let's talk about the tensioning of the heads. Heads have an optimum place of tension where they will vibrate, resonate, sustain their tone and the sound waves they throw off. If you go too low, the head will not vibrate as much as it could, and you get a mushy sound. If you go too tight, then you choke the thing out, and you've gone past the point of its vibration and resonance, and you basically choke the drum. Now, the snare drum is like the spinal column of your drum set. So much happening on the snare drum, so guys are always looking for the one, right? I know guys that have dozens of drums. This is what I have. I have one more in my stacked plywood snare. You saw it on another video on the stacked plywood drums. And it works the same as all the drums in the set. The heads tension at the same time. And so it's just, it's, I don't know, I think it's, what is it, 6.5 or 6 by 13. And, you know, it's got the wood hoops, plywood hoops, just like the rest of the drums. Snare drum sounds good. I didn't know what happened with a stacked plywood set like that, or a snare drum, but it sounds good. Why? Because the sound of the drum is the heads. And I've got my bearing edge correct, even though it's not perfect, and I'll get more into that in a bit. But the heads can seat where the collar and the flat meet the bearing edge. It can seat correctly, so heads give off their tone and everything. Drum feels great, sounds great. In this case, where you have different materials, different depths and stuff, why aren't there dramatic differences in sound? A shell will get involved if you crank the heads past the point of the optimum range. Now, drummers generally like two different things. They either like their snare drums for feel, crank the head way up, they want the bounce, play the rudiments and stuff in what they do, or they don't worry about the bounce, they're playing 2/4 all night long, and they want a sound out of the drum. Then there's players that want things somewhere in between. I'm somewhere in between. I like a high-pitched, crisp sound, but I lean more towards the feel, because I'll do the rudimental type stuff in the music that I play. So I look for feel more than sound, because I can get the same relative pitch out of any drum, regardless of what it is. So I'm going for feel, right? So if you're going for sound, watch again. There are no dramatic differences in these drums. Materials are different. Dimensions are different. The thicknesses are different. Why don't they all sound really different? Again, the two shallow drums, to my ears, sound like they're crisp. Those two drums sound a little more crisp because they're shallow. And I also know on the batter side here, on the snare side head, I changed my bearing edge so that there was as little wood as possible touching the head. I mean, it's a razor sharp edge. And I'm getting more sensitivity, and there's the sound waves hitting that head, the vibration, the snares, rattling. So I know I'm going to get a crispy sound out of this, right? And the same thing is here, although the DW edges, I don't have a clear head here, so I can't see, but it's typical, typical turned edges on a metal shell drum. So here you have these drums that basically sound the same, even though all the materials are different. When you tighten the head to get more feel or bounce, some guys like tabletops. They just want to really snap, crackle, and pop out of their snare drum and playing buzz rolls and stuff. And so once they bring the head to that tension, the head itself is not throwing off the same kind of sound waves it would if it were in the optimum tension range. That means the shell is going to have a little more personality in the sound. But look, again, if I ask you to, hey, close your eyes, I can't see if you are, but close your eyes and tell me if you can tell which drums I'm hitting here, okay? Close your eyes. See if you can tell what I'm hitting. Could you tell that I was doing a rim shot on a wood drum versus a metal drum? No, you could not. Now look, I know there's a little more brightness to a metal drum, but in the context of drum manufacturing hype and marketing, and in a real world live or studio situation, you can tell the difference between what's here? If you could not see the snare drum and you just heard it live, you'd either like the sound, feel means nothing, that's between me and the drum, but the sound, you say, oh, I like that sound, or that's an okay sound, it's a snare drum, or I don't like that sound. Maybe it's a little too low or too high pitch for you or whatever. It's not your thing, okay? That's what you would hear that. But now, this has brass wires. I told you this has steel. I think this has bronze. And this probably has steel, brass, and steel wires. And I have other wires up there. If you're a symphony percussionist, and in an acoustic setting, in a symphony orchestra, acoustic setting in a concert hall, perhaps that percussionist would notice the difference of what they're doing on their snare drum if they have brass or copper or bronze or steel or just straight wires or gut, synthetic. Maybe they would notice the difference, and it might sound different in the acoustic atmosphere, maybe in an acoustic jazz. But when you get into amplified music and you've got microphones and all this stuff going on, or even in a recording setting where you've got microphones, software and all stuff, I'd like somebody to make a video and take one drum and change the wires on that drum to different materials in a live band setting and say, okay, now listen, and you'll hear the difference of the different wires that are being used. Come on. So I've experimented with different wires, mostly because of the synthetic vibration that takes place between toms and the snare heads and the vibration that takes place in the wires. I've used different wires and configurations of wires and stuff to see if I can reduce snare buzz. It used to drive me crazy. Now I realize it's the nature of the beast. It's what the animal is. And so I leave it alone. It sounds like it sounds. I know that my 10-inch tom is probably going to vibrate the wires more than the 8 and the 12. The floor toms won't even bother it. I changed the tension on the head a little bit so the pitch of the drum changes, and now the 8-inch tom may vibrate the snares more, or the 12-inch tom might. Okay? I just live with it now. It's not a big deal to me. But the different components that go into a snare drum obviously make a snare drum different. The depth, all right? And then you have the hardware on it, the throw-off. Most snare drums come with a throw-off and a butt where the wires or the straps are attached. I don't do that. This Tama and this DW have that configuration, a throw off and a butt. Because I'll explain it this way. On all my snare drums, I have a throw off and a second throw off. The reason I do that is real simple. If I want to let down the snares, all right, I throw off the snares. One side drops down. This side is connected to a butt. There's no movement. So when it drops down, it's kind of dropping down like that. That means when I hit the snare drum in the timbale or the tom sound, if that's what I want to use for something, enough of a shock wave can go to that bottom head, and I'd still get some rattle out of the snares up at this corner. But by putting two throw-offs on, I just drop the whole thing straight down. So I don't get any kind of vibration that might take place on that butt end. Because I do like my snare heads tight, real tight, for crisp sound, and I do bring the snares up close, very close, not to the point of choking the drum, but again, that's a matter of feel for each individual drummer. For me, where choking takes place, the snares are too tight, I'm not getting any decent rebound off the heads, and so I back off on the snares a little bit, but I like them tight. Some guys like them loose. They like that real mushy kind of snare drum sound. I like a tight, crispy snare drum sound, so my snares are pretty tight. When I drop them down, I want to drop them full down so I don't hear them. But when you're dealing with a snare drum is different because that very thin bottom head, snare head, batter heads are generally tightened more than you do toms or floor toms, certainly bass drums. And you got the extra hardware and the wires and stuff. So it's a different animal, okay? It's a different thing than other drums. But you see more and more guys have their auxiliary snare over here, but they're also starting to put a snare drum in the first floor tom position. And I've seen guys do this. I've watched them play, different drummers that are now doing that. What do? They detune the heads, way down, and they get that mushy douche, douche, douche sound. If that's the sound they want to douche, douche, and they want that sound in there, they detune the heads, both heads, right? And when they drop the snares, now they've got a floor tom. So whatever they've got up here in front, whatever they got for floor toms, they come around, da 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 da. And you can't hardly tell the difference that this is a snare drum with detuned heads on it. Just sounds like a tom because it's got detuned heads, right? Now, another issue. All right, so in the case of whatever the material is, the depth of the drum is probably 6.5, maybe it's 8. It could be 6. They detune the heads, and you get the sound of a tom. Sound of the drum is the heads, not necessarily the material. The density of the material will enhance the sound waves, the frequencies moving around inside the cylinder. The density of the material, it's like on the bass drum video before this one, right? The maple drum was louder than the metal drum, the trash can. But the maple it's 10 ply, 1/4 inch thick, and the bass drum, even though it's metal, galvanized steel, it's paper thin. I could push a dent into it, all right? So the density is not the same as the other two bass drums, even though they're wood versus metal. All right, so the density of a shell, the eBay, sitting here when I hit a rim shot on the eBay, I kind of feel it here more so than these other drums. So this eBay is very dense material, but it is wood, and I get a tremendous boing out of this drum. That might also be because of the wood hoops. It allows the heads, I believe, wood hoops allow the heads to sing a little more. But that said, now you hear a detuning here. There's a different pitch on the rim shot, not so much on the straight center of the head. They're about the same. But when I do the rim shot, all right, so now the hoops are coming into play on how that tone takes place. As a matter of fact, there's also something interesting here. All these heads have nothing on them except this head. Watch this. So when I come off that dot, this drum drops way down in pitch. It's amazing. The other ones stay pretty much the same. They don't drop. You can hear the drop, but nowhere near as much as this because of what that plastic dot is underneath the head is doing on there. So when I come off that dot, I'm definitely getting a lower shot. So here you have wood, metal. No big deal difference in sound, okay? The sound of the drum is the heads. I mean, it's just the way it is. Whatever the shell does to color the frequencies in the sound waves, nuances, subtleties, that when you take a snare drum and you put it with the rest of your drums in a band setting, the nuances and subtleties, what people hear is a snare drum. They couldn't tell you what the material is. They couldn't tell you anything except the pitch of that drum that you're hitting. And by the time you color the sound with microphones and PA equipment, sound reinforcement equipment, and in the studio, software, mics and software, Will Kennedy, if you know who Will Kennedy is, drummer with the Yellow Jackets. People love, they hear his snare drum and they say, wow, man, what a dynamite snare drum sound. I love the sound of his snare drum. And you may have a snare drum that you've heard on recordings or live, and you say, oh, I love that sound. And drummers are always searching, again, they're always searching for the one. They want the feel and the sound. They want everything in one drum just right, and they'll buy drums. You guys they don't buy toms, they don't buy floor toms, they don't buy bass drums, but they'll buy snare drums. Because they're looking for the one. Well, here we have all these different materials, and if I change the heads, if I tension the heads to the same tension, but I use a double ply head here, I'm going to change the color and the sound of that drum because I'm changing the heads, right? So the material that the drum is made of, and I don't have a plexiglass drum here. I've heard them before, played them. I've heard them in stores and whatnot, and it wouldn't make any difference. The sound of the drum is the heads, what little coloration there is. Again, if the material makes that much difference, I should hear tremendous variation in sound here, but I don't because all the heads are basically pitched the same. I mean, that's just the way it is. Now, another subject I want to look at. I know you've seen this, right? They take a shell, they put it on a flat surface, a marble or a granite slab, nice and flat. They put the shell on there and they say if the bearing edges are perfect, when you put the light inside the shell, you won't see any light escaping. If light is escaping, those bearing edges are not good and you won't get proper tuning, etc., etc., etc. This guy that puts a snare drum in his floor tom position, what's down here? You know what a snare bed is. A snare bed is an area where the drum shell is removed. It could be just a wisp. It could be 3/16 of an inch and everything in between. But the fact is, depending on how wide, and all these drums have different snare beds. I experiment with snare beds. And the Tom and the DW, they have their own snare beds that they put on them. So I put snare beds on these drums. And they're different width, they're different depths. Why don't these drums all sound different? Especially this guy that's using a snare drum over here for a floor tom. If the bearing edges being out make that dramatic a difference, when this guy when he throws down his snares and just uses it on the tom setting, does the drum sound ridiculously bad? Does it sound stupid? Because he's got a snare side head here, and the bearing edges, they're not true. It can't be true. They've got two snare beds in them. It's common sense. Why? Because plastic will stretch, just like organic calf skin will stretch. Everybody knows calf skin will stretch and respond to humidity and stuff and get soft, right? That was the whole point of inventing plastic heads. But plastic heads will stretch as well. So even though you have the snare beds under there, when he throws off the snares, he's got a detuned head down there, detuned head on the batter head. Sounds like a floor tom as he's playing through. You don't hear anything weird over here. Why? Because the head stretches to meet the wood. There's a video, it's a Drumeo video, and Ron Dunnett is the guest, talking about drums and stuff. And at one point in the video, he picks up a drum, 8x12, not my 13, I forget. He picks up the drum. It's an old no-name drum. It's a nothing drum. It's hard, you couldn't, by most standards, you couldn't compare the drum. It's kind of like my 10-inch tom up there from video number 2, right? He hits the drum. Drum sounds great. So the guy interviewing him, I forget, Dave, I think is his name, he says, well, wow, how is that possible? Because the bearing edges are all beat up. The drum is beat up. And Dunnett just shrugs his shoulders. The mystery, it's not a mystery. It's not a mystery. The mystery is how people can believe some of the stuff they do about the hype about bearing edges. As long as you have some kind of a radius. I'll do this too. I'll prove it to you. I'll go out the snare drums, the shells that I use for the bearing edge videos. I'll get one of those and I'll beat up. I'll put dents in it with a drumstick. I'll put dents in it. No big deal. I can take them out with a router. I'll put dents in it. I'll put heads back on. You won't notice any difference. Why? As long as there's some kind of radius of an edge that seats correctly at the collar of the head, then you're going to get some kind of even tensioning and tuning. You get digs in it and stuff like that. Old vintage drums. They're old. They've been used and thrown around and stuff, and they get dents. Or maybe guys, I've even played, and you're hitting all these different drums. Especially I got drums, and you're playing and you're hitting drums, and I'll even come out here way off center and hit the edge somewhere. Put a slight dent in the bearing edge, and you don't hear any difference. So the idea of bearing edges, necessary for perfect sound, is hype. It really is. It's hype. Now, this is the first drum that I ever made, and I still have it because it is the first drum I ever made. This drum is pine, northern white pine. I just wanted to see if I could put it on the table saw and get the angles correctly, put it all together, round it off. But on the inside, see, I don't have the kind of shop that I wish I had. So it's not hard for me to round the outside staves, but on the inside, I don't know if you can see it through this hazy head. I'll show you on one of the other drums. The staves are all flat. They're not rounded on the inside. Does it make a big difference in the sound? No, watch. All right, so here's poplar. Here's pine. There's hardly any difference in volume. They're both loud. This is 3/4 inch staves, poplar, northern pine, not too far apart on the Jonca scale for density. What about maple? Different pitch, obviously, 12-inch head, 13-inch head, but there's no tremendous variation because this is soft wood, northern white pine. It's 3/4 of an inch thick. Changes the density, right? And I keep this drum because I don't really play a 12-inch snare drum. I made it, and I keep it. Here's one here. You remember the video number 2 with all the toms, right? This is the Mapex tom. I turned it into a popcorn snare drum, 6x10 now. I think it was 9x10, 8x10. Now it's 6x10. All right, same thing. This is a birch shell. That's what they said it was. Birch. It's about 5/16, 3/8 of an inch thick. And I put a very sharp bearing edge on there to get as much response out of it as possible. So let's see what we got. Now there's a pitch difference, obviously. There's not a great deal of volume difference. Sounds like a snare drum, popcorn snare drum. And if I were to reduce that to 5x10, 4x10, you get a crisper sound as you change the depth. All right? So, and there's just leather on the outside like the rest of the leather set. That's why I put the leather on it, because I was going to use it as an auxiliary snare. But I've always been a one snare guy. I mean, that's just what I do. So the mystique about drums, let's detune the head, all right? Let's see the difference. Let me detune the head. Some guys like that real douchey sound, douche, douche. That's the sound that they like. Not quite the same response for stick rebound and stuff. All right, so we've detuned the heads, right? All right, so we've detuned the heads. I didn't change the shell, obviously. Still still the same shell, but I detune the heads. Now I got a different sound out of the drums. I can loosen the snares to get more of that mushy sound. Some guys playing 2 and 4 all night, boom, boom. They like that sound. Some guys will even like it. That's not my sound. Let me put one of these on there. That's what I usually told you. If I don't like the ring, I'll use those to get the difference. So I'm not really into the boing, so I'll do that to get just a little bit of lively sound, but dry it out some. So here, we'll put this here. This is some of that stretchy stuff I told you about in the other video, the bass drum video. Kids put this stuff on windows. It's like moon gel, but it's a lot less expensive. So let's really dry this drum up, right? I totally changed the sound of the drum. All I did was detune the heads. I didn't change the shell. Now, let's do it to this. I'll do it to this one. Let's detune the tom one. 6.5 by 13. This is 6.5 by 13. This is 1-inch thick maple. This is probably 2 millimeter thick steel. We'll detune the heads. Now, could you tell? Let me take this stuff off. You tell. I could come up just a touch on that one. And you tell me if you can see some incredible difference at this tension between a wood drum and a metal drum. Maybe you can't do it when it's tight. Can you do it when it's, no tension? I can't tell the difference. I'll loosen up the snares a little bit. Mush them out. So when I loosen up the snares on this one, it didn't put quite the tension on the batter head, lowered the tone even more. I changed the tension of the heads. I get a totally different sound on the drum. So whether the heads are loose, you can't tell the difference between a wood drum and a metal drum. You get a slightly, the nuances again, the subtlety. You get a slightly, call it a brighter sound. I don't know how you can call it a brighter sound when it's mushy like that, but. Now I know that this 1-inch thick drum has a really woody tone to it. But now, at that tension, can you tell that that's wood compared to this? Is that the difference between 1-inch thick wood and 3/16 aluminum? No. This is crisper because it doesn't have a dot on it. It's just a single ply 10 mil head, clear head. This is probably 10 mil, but it's got that tone muffling on it. It's got the dot in the middle. The head changes the sound of the drum. Otherwise, there's the distinction between the drums. There's just nothing massive there. It's just not there. I mean, no offense to anybody. The way you spend your money is up to you. There is a difference between a really bad snare drum and a decent drum, a good drum. There's a difference. I played snare drums. I recorded one of the first Mileage Music CD was from my first session at Tom's house with his drum set that he got from a guy at work who told him it was a good drum set, and it's just a total student level set that was not well cared for. I went to tension the heads, and when I went to tune up the 13-inch tom, the lug broke right off the drum, and then another lug broke. So that was it. I had to put that drum aside. The snare drum was a 5x14 chrome snare with 6 lugs, so I couldn't get the tension I wanted. And it felt the strainer system. It was not a good drum. But when you hear the CD, when you hear the music, yes, you hear that the pitch is not my pitch for a snare drum. It's a lower pitch. But when you hear me playing that 4-piece drum set in the context of the music created a passion in me to play that student level drum set with all my heart, doing all the same stuff that I do on my maple drums or any other drums. I approached it, the music, the same way. So even though the snare drum was just terrible junk, I ended up getting another snare drum for him, Mapex, 5.5 by 14 maple, that I did use on subsequent recordings. But that snare drum was a bad drum. That just was a bad drum because you couldn't do much with it. But still, in the context of the music, you hear a snare drum. That's what you hear. It's a snare drum. These are all snare drums. Personally, like I said, I don't mean to offend anybody. There's no way I'm paying $1,000 for a snare drum. $1,500, $1,200, $1,300, $2,000. I'm not going to do that. If you want to spend that kind of money, I know I don't have to spend that kind of money, regardless of the artisanship that goes into creating it. I don't need to pay that kind of money to get really good snare drum sound. That is perfectly satisfactory to me, right? And I don't, I'm making drums out of nice crispy snare drum. And so if I were to put wood hoops on it, that'll color it a little bit, right? Change the heads, instead of a 10 mil single ply, put something else on there. That's how you change the character and personality of your drums the most. It's just messing with the heads. On snare drums, you're messing with the heads, you're messing with snare wire tension. If you want to try different snare wire material, I don't hear any great difference between brass or bronze or copper or steel. I don't hear any great difference. I do hear a difference between a 10 strand and a 24 strand and a 40 strand. That I hear. Obviously there's more snare stuff going on, right? And that's just a matter of simple common sense physics. There's more wires, there's more stuff vibrating, you get more of the snare sound, all right? But then you have to make sure that your snare beds will allow wider snares, all right? You can't just drop a 40 strand snare set into a snare bed that's made for 16 or 20. It's going to overlap, and you're going to get a lot of crazy rattling. You talk about snare buzz, sympathetic snare buzz. So there's different things of what a snare bed does that goes into a drum, but still, when we get back to the bearing edge thing, doesn't change that floor tom. So the idea of bearing edges not being perfect, that you can't tune a drum that doesn't have perfect bearing edges, it's false. It's just false. And if somebody says, no, it's not, it's true, point me to a video that shows the difference between a drum with I've already told you about it. Look it up. Look up the Drumeo video with Ron Dunnett. And it's about halfway into the interview, as I recall. And you'll see. The bearing edges are all beat up on that drum. Still sounds good. So listen, that's what I wanted to present on snare drums. It's basically the same premise and principle as all the other drums and the stuff that we talked about. The sound of a drum is the heads. In the case of the snare drum, it's the heads and it's the tension of the wires. Shell material, nuances, subtleties of brightness, crisper sound. There's no difference in volume. All these drums are basically the same volume when I smack them. So it's not a matter of volume. I believe that a 1/4-inch aluminum drum, because it's more dense than plywood, should sound louder than the plywood drum. But it really doesn't. There's a difference in the crispness because this drum is shallower and I've got different bearing edges on the bottom. They're really sharp, and I wanted a really sensitive snare sound, and I got that for the wires. But it doesn't have anything really to do with the material. This is just a maple shell with some eucalyptus veneer on it. That's all. So, there it is. I appreciate your time. Thanks for watching. Snare drums. Leave a comment below. Let me know what you think.